Let's move to the Big 12 because, this is a conference, of course, famous in years past for putting up a lot of offense. They've been shifting more and more towards defensive talent in more recent years. But, Garrett, if I look around the country, I think the Big 12 has the most quarterbacks that are kind of in a prove it mode, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, you have the talent, you have the pedigree, but it's time to prove it on the field. It's time to show that you deserve to be in the rankings. So as we go through these, I think again, if you missed the last episode, we're trying to balance what we've seen on the field in college with perceived talent off the field. So when we were talking in the ACC, we're talking about guys like Cade Klubnik, who had all the talent, all the accolades off the field, but we haven't really seen it yet on the field. It's tough to rank those guys. And there's a couple guys like that in the Big 12 as well. As far as proving it on the field and absolutely taking his team to the next level and putting his team on his back, it's hard to have anybody other than Jalen Daniels at Kansas as the number one quarterback. And that's what we're going to go with here. I've seen a lot of preseason all conference accolades for Jalen Daniels. He's usually first team or second team in the Big 12 publications that I've seen. And I think rightfully so. I think we are not talking about a bowl eligible Kansas last year. We're not having this discussion on one of the greatest stories in college football in recent memory without Jalen Daniels just absolutely stepping it up. And I know he was injured. I know that we got, the backup quarterback experience for Kansas in a few games, but when you look at his passing numbers, his accuracy, his propensity to take care of the football, and combine that with just electricity on the ground, it's really hard for me to put anybody else at number one.
Right. And the important storyline note here for Jalen Daniels is that he got hurt against TCU in a game that ended up being pretty close. And if he
Yep.
stayed healthy and was able to finish that game, you might be talking about that whole magic season for TCU last year not happening because they lose to Kansas. And instead, Kansas is 6-0 after that game and looking to build momentum. I'm not saying it would have been roles reversed, but you might have been talking about Kansas having the more magical season of the two. And so I think it's interesting to see where things could have ended up. Really solid last year. Obviously missed about a month, a little bit more than a month of the season. Finished with 66% completions, 2,000 yards on 230 attempts, 18 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Really takes care of the football. And 77 rushing attempts for 425 and 7 touchdowns. Look, some of this has to do with the fact that there's not maybe as much depth in the Big 12. There really is some top end talent in the Big 12, but Jalen Daniels is about as good as they come. Really got the most out of that offense. Had to take over when I'm forgetting I think it was Daniel Highshaw. He gets hurt. And that's a playmaker that they're losing all of a sudden. Kind of had to take over in that offense and really put the team on his back, and he did so. I'm looking at performances like Duke, where he completed 82% of his passes for 324 yards and 4 touchdowns. Had a great bowl game against Arkansas, 37 for 55, 67% completions,
One of the most fun
544
college
yards.
football games I've ever watched, too. That was
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Absolutely. He was every bit as good as KJ, if not a little bit better. I think Arkansas might have won that game more on their defensive merits and what Rocket was able to do there. But look, 544, 5 touchdowns, fantastic from him in that bowl game. And really were some good performances from him. And I think that's going to be what we end up talking about in this conference is where were the good performances? Where did you see him put the team on his back? Where did you see them, really step it up and take this team to the next level? Jalen Daniels did it more than I think anybody that's returning. Anybody that's returning to the Big 12 this year did. Obviously, Duggan was fantastic last year, but in terms of returning quarterbacks, there's nobody who did it more last year than Jalen Daniels.
And he's going to have to do it again if Kansas is going to go back to a bowl game because
Yeah,
that defense is still not going to be stopping
still not
anybody
very good.
this year. So the potential for a lot of numbers and big numbers for him is really high if they're gonna continue their success that next year. Rounding out our top 5, we're gonna go Dylan Gabriel at number 2, Will Howard at Kansas State at number 3, John Reese Plumlee at number 4, and again another fan base I'm sure is cursing at us before we mention their quarterback's name. Rest easy, Longhorn fans. Quinn Ewers is going to round out the top 5. Garrett, again, it's a lot of balance. Again, this is a tough balance for us
Mm-hmm.
to find the balance between who has shown us what they can do already on the field, the production on the field, and the potential for elite production if everything can come together. So with that, I kind of want to start at the back end of this top five because
Yeah.
if you look around the country, a lot of people are just penciling in Quinn Ewers as the best quarterback in the Big 12, maybe top two, top three at worst. We have him at number five. And I think a lot of that is based on, you know, of course he's young. The kid's this should be his, true sophomore season. This is his third year in college football, but it should be his true sophomore season
Mm-hmm.
based on his age. But even dating back to high school, we had the luxury of growing up in Texas and watching a lot of his gameplay in high school. We watched his state championship game against Cade Klubnik in person, and what we came away with was, man, Quinn has all the talent in the world. He can make every throw, but when pressure's in his face and when he has to be the guy to carry his team out of a slump, it's really hit or miss. And we saw that with Texas last year when he had to be the guy. There weren't a lot of times that Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson were getting shut down. But I think about the TCU game, right? I
Yeah.
think about Oklahoma State where the defense just doesn't show up and Quinn has to lead a comeback by his arm, and it doesn't go well for him in the second half of that game. I think about the Washington game where he goes toe to toe with Michael Penix. I realize we're talking about, some of the best teams in college football that he fell down to last year, but when it has to be him, and it's going to have to be him more this year without
Mm-hmm.
Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson walking through that door, it's a struggle, and it has been in the past, and he kind of has to prove it to me to be higher than number five on this list.
And I'd like to remind Longhorns fans, number one, we don't hate your quarterback, but number two,
No.
you weren't convinced that he was number one in the conference or even number one on your team until the spring game came out and Arch Manning maybe wasn't the second coming of the Messiah that we all thought he was, right? We we thought Arch Manning was going to come in here and by virtue of his last name lead the Longhorns back to glory, and then all of a sudden we didn't. One of us on this podcast, I think, maybe called this a little bit earlier than others. I'm not remembering who, but uh, one of us maybe was convinced he wasn't necessarily as chalked up as everyone else thought he was.
Yes, Garrett.
I
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't pat myself on the back any harder. No, Quinn is a very good quarterback. I watched again. We talked about the high school ranks. As much as he didn't play well in that state championship game, I watched him tear up my high school in
Yeah.
like deep in the playoffs. He did not miss a pass. It wasn't close at any point in time. It made me very sad as a high school football watcher here in the state of Texas. But look, he's very talented. He has the arm talent to be number one in this conference by the end of the year. And we could be sitting here again with egg on our face saying, oh, look, Quinn Ewers is a top guy. He ended up as a Heisman finalist. Like, he has the talent for all of
The
that.
ceiling is undoubtedly there.
Yes, absolutely. But let's be honest, until he proves that he can stand up to the pressure and when the blitz hits him, there's something about the blitz that when he's got a guy in his face, he can't deliver an accurate ball. And this was a complaint that I had last year up until the semifinal game with and of course I'm going to blank on the name, but Ohio State's quarterback. I had a
DJ
complaint about
Stroud.
him last year. Yeah, I had a complaint about him last year that yeah, when he gets pressured, he doesn't perform. He proved me right in the Michigan game, and then proved me wrong against Georgia. Quinn could make that switch. He absolutely can make that switch where all of a sudden he looks like he is that next guy to bring Texas to glory. I'm just not sure that he's going to make that complete jump in this season. I think he can make a step in the right direction. I think he can prove that he can put up bigger numbers on a weekly basis. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to, against some of those top teams in those biggest possible spots, put the team on his back when he doesn't have Bijan or Roshan to hand the ball to kind of keep the offense balanced, right? When the defense doesn't have to stay balanced against the run and when they can pin their ears back and just attack, I'm not convinced that Quinn can be the guy every single week. He might be able to, but I'm not convinced that that's a week in and week out thing for him. He put up some great numbers last year. He put up some good performances. I'm looking at the Oklahoma game where he completes almost 70% of his passes for 289 and 4 touchdowns. But again, Oklahoma not really lighting the world on fire on defense last year.
That was probably more difficult to throw against Air than it was to throw against Oklahoma
They
last
were not
year.
a very good defense. And I believe both Bijan and Roshan played pretty well in that game, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't have their stats pulled up, but they both played pretty well in that game as well. And yeah, again, Oklahoma State, not a great game. and even against Washington, played a lot better in a losing effort. The 369 passing yards are great, but only one touchdown to come up with it. I don't know. He's a good quarterback. That's why he makes our top five. Just not convinced he's as elite as a lot of Longhorn fans probably think that he is.
With our other guys in this Big 12 list here, Dylan Gabriel, battled injuries last year. I think he has the potential to put up a lot of stats like he did last year. Oklahoma's losses largely were not Dylan Gabriel's fault last year. He was putting up gaudy numbers even in losses. We've got Will Howard, who just gave Kansas State's offense a whole nother dynamic last year when he came in for the injured Adrian Martinez. That was just he took that job from Adrian Martinez, to be
Mm-hmm.
clear. Like, Adrian was healthy by the end of the year, and Will Howard was the guy, and he looked really promising as the quarterback for this year at Kansas State. I'm excited to see what the post Deuce Vaughn era looks like. DJ Giddens, shout out to our video that's popping up
Yeah.
on YouTube. But yeah, I think that could be a really dynamic offensive combination this year for Kansas State. And John Reese Plumlee entering the league, I know he had lesser competition last year, but the numbers speak for themselves. And the guy played in the SEC. It's not like he hasn't faced Power 5 defenses before. I know that was more in a rushing role, and he's going to be asked to pass against this Power 5 slated defenses. But John Reese Plumlee in that offense that Gus Malzahn wants to run at UCF is going to be very, very dangerous for that UCF offense.
Yeah, if John Rice Plumlee doesn't run the ball, he's not on this list. He's at the bottom of the league. But again, you have to take the entire work. He is a factor in the rushing game, probably more than anybody else on this list, and anybody else in the Big 12. He's going to run the football. He's going to be effective, and he's going to be an issue, I think, for a lot of these Big 12 defenses to handle. We'll see what he can do as a passer. He's had some bright moments and some real stinkers when it comes to passing the football. So we'll see what he's going to end up being able to do in the Big 12. Will Howard, I'm a real big fan of Will Howard and what he was able to do last year. Yeah, Adrian Martinez was, I think, even available for that Big 12 championship game. And Will Howard just decides, I'm going to be the guy to lead this team. And I mean, really played well back part of that season. Never put up maybe massive numbers. They were a little bit more of a balanced offense. But I mean, end of the season, he puts up 1,600 yards and under 200 passing attempts. 15 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Really did a good job taking care of the football. And I am curious to see what he can do given the opportunity, a full season, a full off season of being the number one guy, a full, season being, the guy at your school, being the starting quarterback. I'm really curious to see what he can do and kind of the numbers he can put up in the post Deuce Vaughn era. And then again, rounding it out, Dylan Gabriel ended up being our number 2 guy. Lots of talent passing the football. I think a lot of us think Oklahoma is going to be a lot better this year. Put up plenty of numbers on offense, over 3,000 yards passing, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I'm looking at the Texas Tech game as a bright spot for him. 70% completions, 450 yards, 6 touchdowns, and they still can't beat Texas Tech on the run. Anyways,
the losses were not his fault.
They were not his fault. That
I
defense
mean,
was abysmal.
the lasting image that people have of 2022 Oklahoma is just getting blitzed by Texas at the Cotton Bowl. He was hurt for that game. He got hurt against TCU. Look, the losses were not his fault. That was one of the worst. That was one of the worst Power 5 defenses that we've ever seen in history last year.
It was pretty bad
to put on the field. So, yeah, I mean, Dylan Gabriel, if they can just stop a nosebleed this year at Oklahoma, I think that they've got a really good shot with the way that their offense is going to perform. But yeah, I mean, point to me in the direction that Dylan Gabriel should be blamed. I mean, there's a couple of stinker games that he had, but I don't think that you can blame him for the struggles that Oklahoma had last year. So, yeah, with that, the Big 12 is going to be wild and wacky like it usually is with 14 teams this year. I'm excited to watch some Big 12 football this year and see where everything goes.
Gracious, how about that?